Have you ever had trouble getting even dye coverage on your leatherwork, especially using light colors on large areas? If so, this video was made specifically for you. It's one of the biggest questions I get from my students, and I want to specifically cover how I get even coverage every time without having to go over multiple coats on it. So let's head over and take a look. Before we get into the technique, I want to talk about a couple of variables that are going to have an impact on the finished product that you have. Number one being the leather that we use. So in my opinion, Herman oak leather is by far the highest quality of veg tan tooling leather that you're going to get out there. And that's what we're going to be using for the demonstration here. So if you're using an import veg tan of some sort, you may get a slightly different results. So be aware of what type of leather that you're using. But Herman oak is what we're going to be using for the demonstration here. Also, what type of dye are we using? Now, my preference and go-to is going to be Phoebe's Pro Dye. Now, if there's a color that doesn't come in the Pro Dye, then I will switch and use the leather dye. Now, the leather dye is going to look extremely similar to the Pro Dye, only it will say leather dye instead of Pro Dye there. Both work great, but if I have a available color, I'll go with the Pro Dye. And when we talk technique, I like using these foam chip brushes for large areas. I think they work really good. They hold a lot of dye in there, but we can get it to go on evenly. So I put dye in there and dab it off. I just have my dye put in a wide mouth jar. It's easier for me to get at it for a color like this that I use all the time, walnut. Now, one mistake I see people make is laying down in streaks like this, trying to go in lines. Just in there, you can already see those lines starting to form, right? And then they try to go back this way to cover those up, and we just have some crisscross lines in there. I'm also moving really quick, and that's, you know, the kind of common misconception is, well, I just want a light color, so I want to just go real light when I put that down. The problem is we're trying to get the penetration of the dye into the leather. So the color of your dye, you need to choose just the actual dye color that you want. When we go to put this on here, it's just like when you wet your leather down for tooling, right? We need to have that good penetration of the water into the leather, and we do that by watching how quick that water's absorbing in there. So when we put our dye on there, it's the same thing. It's how long is that dye taking to absorb. The other thing, rather than those straight lines, is I like moving in circles. So I'm going to move in circles. I get all the way to that edge, but I'm watching how long it's taking my dye to absorb. And I want to make sure I'm putting enough on the first time. So as I'm moving through here in these circles, I'm just kind of overlapping a little bit. But you see, it's taking just a second for that to absorb. If I go to a point and it's absorbed really quick, that means I haven't laid down enough dye yet. All right, we want to make sure we're getting that laid down evenly to start with. Now, as we're dyeing that, it's going to start absorbing and drying up back where we started. And it really shows up in the lighter colors. And we're going to switch and go to lighter colors here in just a second. But it's important that I'm watching where I'm actually dyeing and just ignore what's going on back here, because the first thing you want to do as soon as you see it start to lighten up in any place, the common thing is to come back and touch that up. We have to trust the process though. So I'm going to take this one, set this aside, and we'll go back to this one for a second. We'll do this with a dark color, and then we'll come do it with a light color. But now I'll say, well, we need to we need to hit that back up again. Try to get these lighter spots. So as it's starting to dry, and again, this is the mistake people make. They see a light spot starting to form, so let's put a little more dye there. And there's a light spot starting to form, so let's put a little more dye on that spot. And here's a light spot, so we're going to put a little more dye on there. The problem is what was coming up as a light spot now is going to turn into a dark spot because we just added that much more dye to that. So once we get in the practice of putting it down even to start with, let it do its job, okay? So we'll let that sit. Let's go over, switch to a light color and show you how this works with a lighter color. So one of the lighter colors that we have in here is saddle tan. This is just going to be a pretty light thing here when it finishes up. Now when you first put it down, it's going to look darker because anytime you get leather wet with anything, whether it's water or dye, it's going to look darker to start with. But I'm going to show you using the principles we just talked about. I'm watching to see how quick it's absorbing, and then I'm making sure that I put enough down to where it takes that long to absorb it everywhere that I put it down. Now we're going to get the natural kind of looks of that leather, maybe some fat wrinkles or scarring. That stuff's going to show up through our dye, and that's okay. We want that. We want to show that this is not just some kind of plastic piece, right? But by getting that good, strong, even coverage, and then letting it be. We're going to trust the process and let that one sit as we move to our next example here, and we'll come back and see how that's turning up. Now you might say, that's great, Joe, but what if I'm not dyeing the whole piece? What if I have something I want to dye around? So we have something, maybe we have tooling in a corner and we're going around the outside edge, or in this case, for this example, we got a maker's mark here in the middle of this, and we need to dye around that and leave that a natural color. Well, let's look at how we do that. So step one when we're going to go around something is we're going to change applicators to start with. So we're going to use this little small detail brush and get our dye on there. And when I do this, we're going to go around just right around our tooling, or in this case that maker's mark. And I don't need to come out very far. I'm just getting that first little buffer around our tooled spot. But as I do that, I'm following the same principle that we talked about in the big area. I want to make sure I get good enough coverage on that. So I'm watching how much I'm laying down, how quick that's absorbing in when I first put it down. And I want to make sure that is getting on heavy enough so that I can match that same thing when I put down the larger area. It's not taking too long to get around this mark here for example. So I'll just show you the whole process of it. Okay, we're back where we started again. So we'll set that brush aside and go back to our larger foam chip brush again. We'll get some of that on our brush, and I dab off too a little bit because this does hold a lot of dye into it. Now we're going to go through the same process, except for when I come to where we've already dyed here, I'm just wanting to barely get in, kind of overlap that dye. So again, watching how quick this is absorbing all the way out. I don't want to leave big puddles like that, so I'm going to grab that big puddle, pull that out with me there. Anytime we leave big puddles, or like earlier when I went to go touch back on the light spots and try to even that up, what we're doing is putting down more of that pigment in one spot. And that's where we start getting the dark splotches in an effort to get away from the light ones. So it's kind of one of those double-edged swords. You can be trying really hard to fix one thing and you create a bigger problem in the long run. Again, using these circles as I'm moving along here. Again, I don't want to let these puddles sit, so I'm kind of just dragging that out. I'm not ending with the puddle there. All right. Now we're going to let this one sit, and again, trust the process. It's starting to lighten up on this side because we've started over here, made our way back around. This is already soaking in there, but I was laying down plenty of dye when I was there, so I'm going to let that sit and be. When I look back to this other piece that we just did, you can see how much lighter that is already just by letting that absorb in here. And we can see these darker marks from the fat wrinkles and some of the scarring in this piece of leather, which is kind of really just showing off the natural characteristics of the leather, but not the blotchiness that we're fighting with dye work. It's coming out as a really nice, even dyed piece. But we're gonna go one step further and come back on this with oil next. Now the oil I like to use is 100% pure neat's foot oil. Another Phoebe's product. This oil here is derived from the feet bones in cow, or the shin bones in cows, and to where this is a bovine product going back into our leather. That's what I learned on. I know other people use olive oil and things and get great results too. So I'm not knocking any of the other methods, but this is what I use for this method. So with the neat's foot oil, we're going to put this on with a scrap of sheepskin here, and I'm simply going to use the same principles as far as circles rather than streaks, and just get nice even circles across there, and then let that sit. Same thing here, this one that has dye on that, we're going to go in circles right across that and then let that sit. And again, this is part of trusting the process and letting that finish up soaking in there. The reason I put the oil on now is to help. That oil is going to penetrate and it's going to help even that dye color out. I used to go the other way around and put my oil on first, trying to even out the moisture in that leather so that it absorbed the dye evenly. That sure helped as opposed to no oil at all, but I found that in my experience, oiling over top of the dye helps carry that dye and penetrate to get the most even finished product that we're after. So we'll let those sit in and dry and give you a look at our final dye project once that dries. Now that's had a chance to dry, you can see that nice even coverage, only seeing your scars and your natural marks and wrinkles from that hide. This one here, same thing, where we dyed around that stamp, nice even, just some of the wrinkles and scarring in that hide, showing the natural patina of that. But other than that, nice even coverage on there. These are ready to go, get a finish and an antique, and go into the final product. If you enjoy learning step-by-step processes like this and want to learn alongside other crafters looking to grow and build themselves, I invite you to check out the Leather Life Classroom, our online community group. Come join us to be a part of that. We'll put a link down in the description below.